China Global Television Network.
Hello and welcome to Global Business Europe, live from CGTN in London. I'm Juliet Mann.
I'm Paul Barber of Top Stories. The EU approves the AstraZeneca COVID vaccine, but is still fighting to obtain more doses.
Signs of recovery in Europe's economies. Germany and Spain showing slight growth in the fourth quarter of last year.
Robinhood under fire, but shares in GameStop rise again after the online broker eases restrictions on trading.
And the online Davos summit wraps up with a pledge from Japan's Prime Minister to fight for post-pandemic reconstruction. The European Commission has published its contract with drugs firm AstraZeneca amid an increasingly tense row over supply issues. The EU says it now only expects to receive a quarter of the 100 million doses that it says were promised by the end of March.
AstraZeneca disputes that the numbers were binding and has blamed production issues at 2 plants for the shortages. Within the last hour, the European Medicines Agency has formally approved the vaccine. Tony Waterman is live for us now in Brussels. So, Tony, both sides have been standing firm in their interpretation of the promises that were made. We've seen the contract now. Has AstraZeneca broken its commitments?
Well, to be honest, Paul, there seems to be support on both sides of the argument in this contract. That the text seems to support the EU's argument that it can lay claim over doses which are produced in UK factories. The contract says that AstraZeneca will produce these vaccines within the European Union, but it explicitly states, at least in a clause specific to manufacturing sites, that the European Union includes the UK. So you can see that there could be support for that argument there. But the contract also says repeatedly that AstraZeneca will make the best reasonable effort on things like scaling up production, developing this vaccine, on fixing problems if they arise, and also delivering on time, which would support AstraZeneca CEO Pascal Sérieux's claim earlier this week that this is a best effort type of contract. Ursula von der Leyen, the Commission president, has swatted away that argument most recently in an interview this morning, saying that the best effort clause in this contract only applied to the development of this vaccine, and now that it's developed, it's no longer applicable. Large parts of this text, we should mention here, has been redacted. It's been blacked out. The Commission said that that was 95% the doing of AstraZeneca, but it excludes details on things like costs and also on the delivery schedule, which is really at the heart of this issue. But this delay coming from AstraZeneca, as you mentioned, just a quarter of that 100 million doses which were expected in the first quarter, this is only being compounded by other delays. Pfizer has announced a delay, and now we're hearing that Moderna has told Italy and France that it will be delivering fewer vaccines in February.
And Tony, in light of these delays, the EU is tightening export controls on vaccines. Tell us a bit more about that.
Yeah, these controls were just adopted, and they are going to come into effect tomorrow. They are going to run through the end of March. It's going to require any manufacturer that makes a COVID vaccine here in Europe to seek approval before it can export that vaccine internationally outside of the bloc. It will be benchmarked against some criteria, but the biggest criteria is essentially that those manufacturers have significantly met the contractual obligations for deliveries within the contracts that they have with the European Union. There are also other exemptions for the COVAX facility, for example, for neighboring countries, and also for humanitarian efforts. But this could really have wide-ranging impact because there are a number of vaccine production facilities which are in use for these vaccines across Europe, for example, here in Belgium, in the Netherlands, in France, and elsewhere. And there are other countries, not just the UK, which would get some of these vaccines, but also as far as Canada, which has expressed concern that they won't be able to get their contract contractual supply of doses because of this export control. The rationale from Brussels is that, A, they're trying to make sure that the billions of dollars that they have invested in ramping up production at a number of pharmaceutical companies is actually taking place, and also to make sure that these vaccines are getting out to its citizens to help not only save lives but also start rebuilding the European economy. And finally, it's about transparency. Take a listen to what the health commissioner had to say.
Commitment needs to be kept, and contracts are binding. Advanced purchase agreements need to be respected. Today, we have developed a system that will allow us to know whether vaccines are being exported from the EU. This increased transparency will also come with the responsibility for the EU to authorize, with our member states, these vaccine exports.
Well, as this export ban comes into effect, the European drugs regulator has just greenlit AstraZeneca for use across the bloc in people over 18, including that crucial older age group above 65. There were some questions of whether or not they would allow the vaccine to be used in that age group after German health experts said that recommended at least that it not be used because there was insufficient data. But the EMA saying that they believe that there was enough protection, which was in the immune response during these clinical trials, to allow this group of individuals, this over 65 group, to in fact use that. But further doubt being thrown on this vaccine because the French president, Emmanuel Macron, also saying today, just in the last couple of hours, that the jab doesn't work as it's expected. And EMA saying that it has an efficacy, at least by its calculations, of just 60%. So this vaccine being approved, but approved with a cloud hanging over it.
Tony Waterman in Brussels, many thanks.
We missed those tense EU negotiations over vaccine delivery. The German health minister is warning that the country doesn't have enough shots of the already approved jabs to hit its targets.
A shortage is expected over the next 10 weeks and appointments are already being cancelled en masse. Ryan Thompson has more from Frankfurt.
13 weeks into a nationwide lockdown, German COVID wards are still under pressure. Hospitalizations for the virus are far higher than during the first wave, and a majority of patients here are currently on ventilators.
Jeden Tag sehr anstrengend.
Every single day is hard work, and I get worried when we have a staff shortage. I worry every day whether we have enough people to do justice to these patients.
Nurses like Miriam once saw vaccines as the light at the end of the tunnel. Enough inoculations to at-risk patients, and the strain on hospitals like hers could disappear by early spring. But as that point nears, Germany is struggling to give as many jabs as promised, and the health minister Jens Spahn is warning the next 10 weeks will be tough due to a shortage of vaccines. In some parts of the country, appointments have been cancelled as supplies are running short. This vaccination center in Wiesbaden was ready to give 1,500 jabs each day.
Due to the scarcity of the vaccine, we can currently vaccinate only 288 people. So our wish is, of course, to vaccinate more, but this requires the vaccine being available.
Germany's top-selling newspaper Bild has called the shortage a scandal, and feeling the heat, state premiers across the country are demanding more answers from Berlin. A summit, which will include pharmaceutical companies, is scheduled for Monday.
And there are signs that collaboration is giving way to progress, though it might be a way off. The French pharmaceutical giant Sanofi has agreed to produce millions of doses of the BioNTech-Pfizer jab here in Frankfurt. It's an unusual collaboration that will speed vaccination efforts. However, the delivery of those doses aren't expected until the summer. Ryan Thompson, CGTN, Frankfurt.
The Novavax jab is poised to become the latest weapon in the fight against coronavirus. The British-made vaccine is almost 90% effective and is the first to show clear protection against the UK variant. Nicole Johnston is in London for us. Hello there, Nicole. So potentially another vaccine on the market. Talk us through the potential timescale here.
Yes, it's certainly good news on the UK front. This would be its fourth vaccine if it gets regulatory approval. So that's the next part of the process. That could take a few weeks. It's something that's happening pretty quickly here in the UK. The other issue is the manufacturing of it. Now, this is an American company, but the manufacturing is due to take place in the northeast of England. That plant is being built as we speak, and word is that it should be ready in March or April. So if the approval comes through, it could come on stream quite quickly. Some 15,000 people were involved in the clinical trials in the UK up to the age of 84. And interestingly, 1/3 of them were over the age of 65. So good results there. Some of the other news with that vaccine is it costs $16 per vaccination, which makes it more expensive than the AstraZeneca one, but cheaper than both Pfizer and Moderna, and it can be kept at room temperature. But internationally, the big development really is the news that it appears to offer good protection against the UK variant. That's the variant that is more transmissible, and with some studies showing it could be up to 30% more deadly. Let's hear what Professor Paul Heath had to say about it, the chief investigator of the UK's Novavax trial.
Well, I think that we now have another COVID-19 vaccine that is safe and highly effective. That's number one. Number two, it's highly effective against the new variant. So that takes away perhaps some of the doubts that we may have had as to whether this variant was going to be an important barrier to having an effective vaccine in the UK. But I think we have shown that that is not the case.
So, Nicole, very obviously a boost to the UK vaccination campaign. But how is that going?
Well, if you believe the British government, they say that the vaccination campaign is going very well. They've been trying to keep the attention and the focus on that, partly to draw away from the appalling death toll here of over 100,000 people. British Prime Minister Boris Johnson has said that 1 in 10 UK adults have now had their first dose. He says that they are on track for the top 4 priority groups to have been vaccinated by mid-February. And so far, 80% of people over the age of 80 have been vaccinated. And even the chief executive of AstraZeneca has said that everyone over the age of 50 should be vaccinated in the UK by March. So if that happens, that's sort of quite an incredible pace here. Some sign of good news, at least in the UK. All of this, though, has been dependent on the UK employing that controversial strategy of delaying the second dose of the vaccine. And now we have this news of European Union export control. So we'll have to wait and see what kind of impact that has on the UK's ability to get that AstraZeneca vaccine from the continent.
Nicole Johnston, thank you very much for that update. Well, Johnson & Johnson have announced that its single-dose vaccine is 66% effective in preventing COVID-19. But the company found a slightly higher rate of 72% in the US. The US pharma giant conducted large-scale phase 3 trials spread across 3 continents against multiple variants and involving nearly 44,000 people.
Paul Hunter is Professor in Medicine at the University of East Anglia, and he joins us now. Thank you very much indeed for your time, Professor. Let's start, if we can, with Johnson & Johnson. How significant are the results for this vaccine?
I think they're very good, particularly as we're talking about a single dose here. The vaccine itself is another, what we call a viral vector vaccine, so it sort of has some similarities with the Oxford AstraZeneca vaccine. And yes, it's a single dose. How long that will need to go before we have to give a booster, only time will tell. Probably, I suspect, we'll be looking for boosters on this within about 6 to 12 months. But it is certainly good news and will make a big contribution when it comes online to the relative scarcity that we're seeing about vaccine availability at the moment.
And would it perhaps make it easier to distribute in developing countries?
Yes, this is a vaccine that you can store easily at room temp, not at room temperature, sorry, in domestic style refrigerators. So yes, it's going to be a lot easier to distribute it, particularly in low-income countries that would struggle with the intense cold chain requirements of certainly the Pfizer vaccine, and also to a lesser extent the Moderna vaccine.
Well, let's switch over to the AstraZeneca jab, the European Medicines Agency approving it now for everyone over 18. That's despite German concerns. What do you think about that? Should it be given to people over 65?
Oh, absolutely. I think there is actually, although the Germans are quite right, we haven't got as many people in the phase 3 trials from older age groups as we should have had with the Oxford AstraZeneca trial. We have phase 2 trial results showing that even in people over 70, you generally get pretty much the same responsiveness to antibody production as younger people. And of course, we know really that the antibody production is probably the single most important thing in these vaccines. So it's still looking very good in the older age groups. And I'm fall in an older age group myself, and I'd be quite content to have the Oxford AstraZeneca vaccine.
And we've also had the trial results for Novavax in the UK and in South Africa. How positive were they?
These were very good, actually. We've at the moment we've got a little bit more information on Novavax than on the Johnson & Johnson vaccine, but more information on both of these still need to be made available. The big point is, as has already been mentioned, that the Novavax is pretty much identically effective against the new English variant and the old variants of the disease, and that's very reassuring. We sort of knew that because the English variant doesn't have what we believe is called an escape mutant, so the mutation doesn't seem to take it out of the immune control that you get following both natural infection and vaccination. The South African variant, which is indeed spreading in Europe now, is somewhat less affected by the vaccine, but not to a level that it will make the vaccine not useful. And certainly the vaccine will continue to be extremely valuable, but it's not quite as effective. So this is an indication for the future about how we might need to be changing our vaccines. And although we only really have this data on the South African vaccine from these very recent results, we can pretty much be sure that that also applies to all the other vaccines out there, because they essentially are using the same target for the body's immune system. So the South African variant does look like it's a step towards being escaping from vaccine control. And at some point, particularly if there are more escape mutations, we will need to be changing the formulation of a lot of our current vaccines.
OK, we'll leave it there. Professor Paul Hunter, we really appreciate your expertise. Thank you.
My pleasure.
You're watching CGTN. Coming up, Hungary is stocking up with 5 million doses of China's Sinopharm vaccine following drug regulatory approval.
Covering the world from 4 continents. A new horizon. Teams in Beijing, Washington, D.C., Nairobi, and London, who connect, interact, and inquire to bring you the stories that matter to all. The Link, only on CGTN.
Search CGTN Europe wherever you get your podcasts to subscribe to the Agenda podcast. The Agenda with me, Stephen Cole, always gets to the heart of the story. Just subscribe today and listen now.
Don't forget you can sign up to our daily newsletter. We bring you all the top business headlines straight to your inbox. So sign up for free at this address. CGTN. See the difference.
Welcome back. Well, 3 of Europe's largest economies all fared better than expected, with fourth quarter GDP results out on Friday. Even so, the resurgence of COVID-19 and lockdowns weighed heavily on consumer and business activity across the continent.
Well, Germany managed to eke out a 0.1% growth in the final quarter of last year, beating expectations for stagnation in Europe's largest economy. France's economy shrank 1.3% in the fourth quarter after the country entered a second lockdown in October. The result outperformed expectations, though, of a 4% contraction. And Spain's economy achieved a quarterly growth of 0.4%, narrowly avoiding a return to negative territory. That's despite the government strengthening coronavirus restrictions back in November.
Well, Daniel Gross is an economist at the Brussels-based think tank, the Centre for European Policy Studies. He says the GDP figures are a sign that things might start to pick up.
I would say the short-term outlook is not that bad. Maybe the next month or so will be very difficult, but over the summer, with vaccinations finally coming out, I think the economy should continue to recover, maybe not as quickly as we thought. But I'm more concerned about the longer run, because then that's the real question. Has Europe used this pandemic period to prepare itself for the new digital age? And I think that is where the biggest difficulties will be lying.
So central bankers standing by with their toolbox full of tools to help, but we seem to be getting mixed messages from central bankers about what they could pull out of that toolbox.
Of course, the European Central Bank, as central banks throughout the developed world, are unhappy about the state of the economy. They would like to see stronger inflation, but they realize that they cannot really do a lot, because this recession is special. It's not about people not having enough money to spend. It's not about companies not getting the credits they need, because financial conditions are very, very favorable right now. And central banks cannot really do anything about a pandemic which forces governments to close down tourism sector and some other sectors which depend on close human contact. And that's why they do everything they can, but it's very little, because this is a sectoral recession in which monetary policy cannot really achieve a lot.
You mentioned the US and China and how those economies are faring. How would you compare what the state of play is in Europe to those economic powerhouses?
Unfortunately, Europe is really behind. Behind both China, which of course we know has really dealt with the pandemic in a much better way. It's already beyond it. In the United States, we have had enormous churn in the labor markets. Dozens of millions of people have been fired. Dozens have been rehired. Some sectors, especially digital ones, are emerging stronger than beforehand. So the United States is adapting very quickly to this no digital age. Unfortunately, in Europe, there has been very little structural adjustment. There's some catching up from the very deep slump of last summer, but Europe can really only try to somewhat reduce the difference that separates it from the United States. But even though it doesn't mean a second recession, it doesn't mean that really Europe is performing up to what it should be.
A Dutch court has ordered energy giant Shell to pay compensation over oil spills in Nigeria's Niger Delta. The case was brought in 2008 by farmers and campaign group Friends of the Earth, seeking reparations for lost income from contaminated land and waterways. Shell said the damage to its pipelines was a result of sabotage and not poor maintenance. The company also argued that it should not be held legally responsible in the Netherlands for the actions of a foreign subsidiary. Friday's ruling could pave the way for more cases against the multinational oil firm. Punk rocker footwear brand Doc Martens has kicked off its London Stock Exchange listing after attracting bumper demand. Friday's sale of shares values the company at around $5 billion. Shares were up by just under a fifth, and the offering raised $1.78 billion. The IPO is a win for the firm's majority owner, private equity firm Permira, who bought the company in 2014 for $460 million. The CEO of the London Stock Exchange says the UK should embrace so-called blank cheque listings in order to help London remain a global financial centre after Brexit. Also known as SPACs, or Special Purpose Acquisition Companies, it refers to companies who raise money by making their stock market debut and then using that money to buy another company. Comes as London Stock Exchange completes its $27 billion acquisition of the data firm Refinitiv on Friday. Shares in H&M fell more than 5% in Stockholm after the Swedish retailer says its annual profit tumbled by nearly 90%. The world's second biggest fashion group has around 5,000 stores across the globe, but more than a third of those are closed due to the pandemic. H&A Group, one of China's largest conglomerates, has announced bankruptcy and restructuring after a multi-year debt and liquidity crisis. The company received notification from South China's Hainan High People's Court on Friday. The group started as Hainan Airlines in 1993, operating 4 aircraft to improve transport links between the Chinese mainland and its home base on Hainan Island.
Shares in the American retailer GameStop are surging after the criticised trading platform Robinhood partially lifted buying restrictions. Days of volatile trading have seen individual retail investors pitted against hedge funds. The funds had bet billions of dollars on stocks like GameStop, falling, but individual investors brought together on Reddit bought up stocks, driving prices up. Jemima Walker reports.
It looks set to be the ultimate David and Goliath story, until Robinhood got involved.
Hey, uninstall Robinhood. Get it off your phone. Woo!
The Robinhood investment app, along with several others, is limiting the number of shares investors can buy in companies including GameStop and AMC Entertainment.
You know, they're called Robinhood, right? So, it's kind of ironic that they're helping the big guys.
US electronics retailer GameStop has been a target of shorting, which is where hedge funds borrow shares in companies they think are failing. And when the price does fall, they buy them back, pocketing the difference as profit. But a community of Reddit users has poured money into GameStop, causing share prices to soar and then fall when share buying was curbed. In a statement on Twitter, Robinhood's co-founder says the trading platform must observe US regulations and was not being directed by hedge funds.
As a brokerage firm, Robinhood has many financial requirements, including SEC net capital obligations and clearinghouse deposits. Some of these requirements fluctuate based on volatility in the markets and can be substantial in the current environment.
The epicenter of the story is the US, but there are young investors all over the world who say they want to hold the financial establishment to account. Myron Sakas is a British university student who had bought GameStop shares through trading 2-on-2, which also temporarily restricted buying.
It's been quoted that, you know, we are ruining the integrity of the market. And I say, what is the integrity of the market? Is it, you know, so the integrity of the market is rich people making money off poor people, but not the other way around. They don't like it then, so then they restrict it. Is the integrity of the market having short positions based on people losing their jobs, people losing their livelihoods in order to make those millionaires and billionaires that are in the hedge funds even richer?
GameStop shares are rising again on Friday. It's not clear how long the surge will last, but volatility is likely to continue. Jemima Walker, CGTN.
Well, it is a story that's getting bigger and bigger, raising all sorts of questions. From all, we're joined now live by John Terrett in New York. So, hey there, John. We were talking about GameStop on the show yesterday. What's the latest?
Yeah. Well, you know, Paul and Juliet, I think this is getting a little bit out of hand. I think we're going to be talking about this for a very long time to come, and I think it could turn into a very significant story all round. We'll have to see really what happens next week, but I can tell you from my point of view here, the dust has far, far, far from settled over this issue. And in fact, I think what's happened is it's evolved in the course of the last week or two from people on Reddit and other websites taking a fundamental position about GameStop and AMC and the other stocks that are being shorted by Wall Street, taking a fundamental position. But now, because of all the media coverage, we've got possibly reckless gambling going on by people in their basements all over the world, and they may get hurt, and I think that the regulators here in America, the leading regulator, the SEC, is very, very worried about what is going on. They've just said in the last half an hour or so that they've warned against what they call market manipulation, and that will be both sides, the Wall Street elite and the people in their basement. I think it's probably certain that some hedge funds are going to go under, or at the very least are going to need billions and millions of dollars in order to keep them going. It could affect people's pension plans right around the world. And of course, as Jemima said in her excellent report there, that there have now been protests from ordinary people in tax the rich type protests outside the New York Stock Exchange. We were live on the air last night when one broke out behind me, also at the SEC headquarters in DC, and also at the company of Robinhood, which is this website that seems to be at the center of it all. And people are angry, very angry now, that these companies like Robinhood and others have restricted the trading. Now, they stopped you from buying stock in GameStop for a while. That, I think, has now been lifted, but there are other restrictions on options and things like that. And Robinhood itself has had to raise $1 billion in capital just to make sure that it doesn't go under. Meanwhile, celebrities are siding with the ordinary people in their basements. I'm sorry I say ordinary people. You know what I mean when I say ordinary people. But the retail investors, the day traders, people like Jon Stewart, very famous film star and comedian, and also Mark Cuban, who is a very famous billionaire businessman in America and the owner of the Dallas Mavericks, which is a basketball team. They're coming out and siding with the retail investors rather than Wall Street. And the sense here is that GameStop and the others are rather leveling the playing field in favor of ordinary people using Wall Street tactics in order to make a bit of money. But the truth of the matter is GameStop is worth more this morning than some of the S&P 500 companies, which these are the bluest of the blue chips, and GameStop is literally worth more than they are. And it's a crumbling mall store that sells you video games, rents you video games, buys your old video games, and will sell you a joystick if you want in order to play video games. So it's all really very, very confusing. Meanwhile, the short selling is going on now, not just from Wall Street, but from the private investors' point of view. And why wouldn't they? Because if it's up around $400 and they can get it for $4, then that's a reasonable short. So they're right to do it. It's not wrong, but it's adding to the volatility. Meanwhile, pictures are on the internet now from places like Australia, where you have people doing this day trading in their shorts, bare-chested, with a gin and tonic in their hands, and showing the camera the huge amount of money that they've been making through all of this. Now, this morning, GameStop opened up 80%, 90 minutes ago when the day got underway here, and it's presently up around 70%. AMC, the cinema chain, is up 60%. BlackBerry, the Canadian Toronto-based phone maker, is up by 10%. And these are other stocks, along with GameStop, which are being shorted or have been shorted in the last week. So, Monday, Juliet and Paul, what happens on Monday? We'll have to wait and see.
We will have to wait and see. Amazing story. Thank you for explaining it so clearly. John Terrett on Wall Street. Thank you.
Coming up after the break, it survived the fall of the Roman Empire, but the pandemic is taking its toll on the Colosseum.
Patient after patient after patient. They take a long time to get better. They're the sickest patients we've ever seen.
It's a race against time, because we can all see the threat that our NHS faces, the pressure it's under.
We're dealing with something we knew very little about.
Europe's first two epicentres in February have received their first dose of the Pfizer-BioNTech vaccine.
Another day, another grim milestone for the UK in its fight against COVID-19. 100,000 people have now lost their lives after contracting the virus.
the agenda with me, Stephen Cole, we look up into space. We look down into data. We look at debt. We look at politics. We look at opioids, climate change. We look at all the issues that really matter around the world. But you matter too. We want to tell the stories you want to see and hear about. Make it your agenda.
We can try out the wild and crazy ideas.
Nothing can stop an idea whose time is coming. This idea is coming.
I actually feel quite comfortable in isolation.
We should all be very basic when we try to save the world.
Awesome!
We hope it will happen. We have to live in hope.
Hi there, welcome back to Global Business Europe with Juliette Mann and me, Paul Barber. The headlines again. The EU approves the AstraZeneca COVID vaccine, but is still fighting to obtain more doses.
Signs of recovery in Europe's economies. Germany and Spain showing slight growth in the fourth quarter of last year.
And Robinhood under fire, but shares in GameStop surge again after the online broker eases restrictions on trading.
The Japanese Prime Minister, Yoshihide Suga, has told the World Economic Forum he's standing on the front line of the battle against coronavirus, and his country will do its utmost to end the pandemic. He was among the key speakers at the Davos summit, which is winding down after a week of virtual talks. CGTN's Andrew Wilson has been following today's events.
It was the final day and much had already been said and agendas set out. But from the European Union there was a final reminder that the challenges ahead are multidimensional and that as a bloc it recognised the need for more rather than less engagement.
For Europe to continue to grow, to sustain the level of prosperity, it's important that we are connected to this global growth, and for this we need open trade and investment.
Climate change dominated the 2021 forum. Nevertheless, a display of determination by the Prime Minister of Japan for a green and digital future was welcomed.
Regarding the electrified vehicles, by 2035, we will achieve 100% of electrified vehicles amongst the new passenger vehicle sales. And Japan will present an ambitious objective for 2030 before COP26.
The theme this year had been the Great Reset, a sustainable rebuild after COVID. But it was the resetting of geopolitics that aired some of the week's most memorable positions from a panel of experienced international diplomats.
My observation is that the current new U.S. administration needs time to estimate what are the areas it has to cooperate with China, and what are the areas it needs to manage with China, avoiding conflicts. And for the Chinese side, I think we also need to reflect and observe what is the intention, what is the next move.
You know, the world is a very complicated place, and reality is not clean cut. I always say reality is very messy. And I think the job of leaders at national level and global levels is to manage that messiness and find solutions that are beneficial to all. Win-win, understand each other, and try to find ways that are beneficial to all sides.
The challenges declared this week couldn't be greater. There was plenty of consensus, although no guarantees that long-term agreements would follow. Andrew Wilson, CGTN.
Well, as outlined in that report, discussions on day 5 revolved around trade and geopolitics and the 3 Cs that have defined Davos 2021: COVID, climate and cooperation. I spoke to campaigning environmentalist Marjun about how far this week has gone towards setting the climate agenda for the year ahead.
Far more hopeful than, say, half a year ago, because at that time it looks I have to say, used to look pretty gloomy because at that time, either the U.S. withdrew from the Paris Agreement, and many other industrialized countries were not willing to come up to solid actions, and China, which suffered from an economic slowdown and pandemic hit, also have seen a rebound of carbon emission at that time. So it didn't look very promising. But then, EU enhanced its commitment, and then President Xi represents China to make the historic carbon neutrality pledge, followed by Korea and then Japan, and the Biden presidency have brought the U.S. back to the Paris Agreement.
Now, the World Economic Founder said that 2021 is going to be a crucial year for mankind. There have been many big changes, not least the relationship between the United States and China. Where do you think we should be pitching our expectations when it comes to that relationship and the climate story?
The past 4 years, I have to say, was some painful experience, because almost like in any international gatherings and events, in any kind of international policy-making process, we could see that when the U.S. representative entered the room, all the others have to shut down about any discussions about anything related to environment and climate, because it was just simply not tolerated, accepted. So that was really painful, and we lost 4 years. And during these 4 years, our climate situation is getting worsened, and now we have a much shorter time to really try to enhance our action.
So let's look ahead to the G7, to COP26. What needs to happen?
What needs to happen is really for all the countries to try to integrate all this commitment into solid, economic and social political planning and strategy, and to, all the countries, it is a common challenge for all the countries to try to transform their energy supply, manufacturing, and transportation and consumption into a zero carbon model. I mean, this is highly challenging, and because the zero carbon commitment is a long process, between 30 to sometimes 50 years away from now. So we have to, create all the milestones for the short term and mid-term, all these targets.
Well, it may not have been the Davos event we're used to. World leaders and financial heavyweights weren't trudging through the snow to get front row seats at each special address. But in online forums, they managed to get to the nub of their big concerns and priorities. Here's what some of those leading voices had to say at the Davos Agenda 2021.
Despite the trillions of dollars in relief packages worldwide, global recovery is rather shaky, and the outlook remains uncertain. We need to focus on current priorities and balance COVID response and economic development.
When public health issues become politically charged, like wearing a mask or not becomes a political statement, you cannot imagine how destructive that is to any unified public health message.
At AstraZeneca, we decided to provide this vaccine to everybody around the world at no profit and as quickly as possible, so that we could stop the virus from spreading and potentially mutating and returning to the rich countries.
Financial means, funds are one thing, but in these times of scarcity, obviously the fact whether one actually has a vaccine is also of the essence. And this is all about fair distribution, not only about money.
It is a moral duty to treat the vaccine as a global public good that ensures that low-income and poor countries are not left at the end of the waiting line.
The situation might develop unpredictably and uncontrollably if we will sit on our hands doing nothing to avoid it. And there is a possibility that we may experience an actual collapse of global development that might result in a fight of all against all.
So far, only 2 made-in-India corona vaccines have been introduced to the world. In the near future, many more such vaccines will be made available from India. These vaccines will help us in assisting countries across the world.
We rejoin the international climate effort with humility, and I mean that, and ambition. Humility because we know we've wasted 4 years in which we were inexcusably absent. Humility knowing that today almost no country, and for certain no continent, is getting the job done.
When the U.S. decided to leave the Paris Agreement in the summer of 2017, there was a major risk. But I see that over the last few years since, the House of Cards did not crumble.
We need to contain this immense power of the big digital companies. We want it clearly laid down that Internet companies take responsibility for the manner in which they disseminate, promote, and remove content.
In other news, experts from the World Health Organization have begun fieldwork in China to study the origins of the coronavirus. On Friday, they visited a hospital in Wuhan, where some of the earliest COVID-19 patients were admitted. It's the team's first site visit after finishing a 2-week quarantine. The WHO says that the mission also plans to visit the Wuhan Institute of Virology and a seafood market that was linked to many of the first cases.
China says it will not recognise the British National Overseas Passport as a valid document for travel or identification. Well, starting from Sunday, Hong Kong residents with a BNO passport and their dependents will be able to apply for a visa to live and work in the UK. And after 5 years, they can apply for citizenship. More than 5 million people are eligible. The UK announced the new immigration scheme last year after China imposed a sweeping national security law in Hong Kong, which the UK says violates freedom of expression. China hit back by accusing the UK of meddling.
The UK is trying to turn a large number of Hong Kong residents into second-class UK citizens and has already completely changed the nature of the BNO as in the memorandum between the UK and China. This action has severely violated China's sovereignty, grossly interfered in Hong Kong affairs and China's internal affairs, and severely breached international law and the basic principles of international relations. China is indignant at this and strongly opposes it.
In Lebanon, a protester has been killed after a 3rd night of violence in Tripoli. Protesters are angry about a strict coronavirus lockdown that has cut off livelihoods amid a collapsing economy. Local media said police fired live rounds on Thursday night as a crowd tried to storm the city's government building. Scores of people were wounded. Protests have continued in Poland after a controversial abortion law comes into effect. Police in Warsaw clashed with a crowd of people outside the city's Constitutional Tribunal building. The ruling was delayed after around 430,000 Poles demonstrated against the decision in what analysts say were the largest protests Poland has seen for over 40 years. And a fire at a hospital in Romania, which was treating COVID patients, has killed at least 5 people. 4 wards at the facility in the capital Bucharest were affected, and more than 100 patients had to be transferred to other hospitals. Last November, 10 people suffering from COVID-19 died in a fire at an intensive care unit in the north of the country.
Coming up after the break, the scramble to be vaccinated is leading to allegations of queue jumping and bribery in Austria.
Each day, there are millions of stories. Each one can open new perspectives, new possibilities. Wherever you look, we are there. To see, discover, explore. We put the pieces together to find what really matters to you, all around the world, all around the clock. Our reporters are at home across the globe. From our headquarters in Beijing and production centers in Washington, Nairobi, and London, China Global Television Network. Stories from across the globe, reaching people across the globe. CGTN. See the difference.
The agreement is signed. But what is the real deal now the UK has left the EU? For trade, for business, for the city, for ordinary people. Make sense of Brexit with CGTN.
Welcome back. More on our main story now, the progress of Europe's COVID vaccination campaign. While the EU seeks improved access to the AstraZeneca jab, Hungarian authorities have agreed to buy 5 million doses of China's Sinopharm vaccine for emergency use. Our correspondent Mia Alberti is in Budapest.
It's official. Hungary is the first country in the European Union to approve a Chinese vaccine. And in a show of confidence, Viktor Orban also said that he would take the Chinese vaccine himself.
I wait for the Chinese vaccine. That's the one I trust the most. Personally, I think that the Chinese, who have known this virus for the longest time, must know the most about it.
The move shows Hungary moving away from Brussels once again after it has already purchased more than 2 million vaccines of Russia's Sputnik V. But the Prime Minister said that this should not be seen as a political move.
We can only make a choice between Eastern and Western vaccines if we have them. If we don't have them, there's nothing we can choose from.
The Hungarian leader also said that up to 1.7 million people could be vaccinated with the Chinese jab once it becomes available. But there are some concerns regarding the approval of Sinopharm's vaccine. On Thursday, the government changed the vaccine approval process, basically saying that any vaccine could be approved for emergency use if it has already been used by 1 million people overseas. However, health experts in the country are expressing some concern about the government literally bypassing the health regulators' decision, and this may not help in a country with already high levels of vaccine skepticism. Mia Alberti, CGTN, in Budapest.
Meanwhile, in Austria, cases of corruption linked to the COVID-19 vaccine rollouts have sparked outrage, with reports of local politicians receiving their vaccines ahead of the elderly and vulnerable. This is happening as supply problems slow the progress of the country's immunization program. Johannes Plashberger reports.
Many Austrians are furious about the behavior of their local politicians. While many old people are still waiting for their COVID-19 vaccination, numerous mayors jumped the queue to be vaccinated, even though they were not on any waiting list. And the scandal is not dying down. Every day there are new reports of local officials getting their vaccines early. In the meantime, the corruption prosecutor has become involved. There are accusations of mayors bribing the authorities, which decide who is vaccinated next.
Well, I don't think it's right that the mayors have jumped the queue. It's morally condemnable, but it didn't surprise me.
Austrian authorities now plan to fight vaccine queue jumpers. Birgit Fükater-Skut, head of Vienna's crisis management team, has announced new controls.
We go unannounced at short notice to the individual vaccination centres and look at how these pre-registration lists are handled.
From now on, these lists of elderly and vulnerable people eligible for the first round of vaccines will also apply to leftover supplies. Previously, surplus vaccines could be administered to anyone who was on hand to take them, giving local politicians a window of opportunity.
Now the priority here is to call only the very elderly.
It remains to be seen whether these precautions will be enough to prevent a repeat of what happened here at this Vienna nursing home. Several of those vaccinated here did not belong to a COVID-19 risk group, as the home admits to CGTN.
Some vaccine doses, 14 doses, went to relatives who do not belong to the classic risk groups, aged and/or chronically ill. We regret that very much.
Austria is not alone. Corruption has become an issue for vaccine programs elsewhere in the European Union, including Spain and Italy. In Spain, the top military chief resigned after his illegitimate COVID-19 vaccination was revealed. And also in Italy, investigations are now underway. Johannes Blechberger, CGTN, Vienna.
The director of Italy's world-famous Colosseum has recounted the emotional and economic impact of the country's COVID-19 closures. However, as the site waits to reopen, progress is being made on a landmark renovation in which they hope to entice visitors from around the world to return. Hermione Kitson has the details.
It's one of the wonders of the world and an enduring symbol of Italy's history and culture. But centuries after being built for the masses, the majestic monument sits eerily silent.
There has been a big emotional impact because clearly we are used to hearing thousands of voices every day from countries around the world.
Usually the Colosseum is inundated with visitors, 25,000 a day. Due to COVID-19, it's been forced to close its gates twice for a total of 6 months, creating a significant cultural and financial void.
We have obviously had huge economic losses, around 51 million euros since the beginning of the pandemic.
It indicates the depth of the economic damage due to lockdown across the Eternal City. Silvia Poggiani has worked as a Rome tour guide for 20 years.
Seeing it like this is just breaks my heart. So this has been very challenging psychologically and of course economically.
The only silver lining of lockdown, time for crucial maintenance and future projects, such as a new arena platform restoring the site to its ancient glory.
We want the visitors to really understand how the monument was, because at the moment it's incomplete. We don't see the platform where all the activity happened.
Originally, the arena floor was built over cells and tunnels where gladiators and also animals were caged ahead of their contests. Experts say its reconstruction will offer an interesting insight into the complexity of how the shows were staged. There is now an international competition to find the perfect design. Work is expected to start this year and be completed by 2023.
We are focused on the future and we can't wait for everyone to return.
Who can resist to all this? I mean, it's impossible. Rome is the best city in the world to be a tour guide.
Faith that slowly but surely the cultural capital will come back to life. Hermione Kitson, CGTN, Rome.
And finally, if you like a whiskey of distinction, which I know Juliet Mann certainly does, Bonham's in Hong Kong was the place to be. An auction of some of the world's most expensive tipples has just closed, with this Macallan going for a cool $137,000. Tasty. And a decanter of Glen Grant, a 72-year-old whiskey by Gordon and MacPhail, went for nearly $55,000.
I prefer it when somebody else is buying the drinks. The headlines again. The EU approves the AstraZeneca COVID vaccine, but is still fighting to obtain more doses.
Signs of recovery in Europe's economies. Germany and Spain showing slight growth in the fourth quarter of last year.
And Robinhood under fire, but GameStop shares surge again after the online broker eases restrictions on trading.
And that is Global Business Europe. Thank you so much for watching.
More on all of our stories at europe.cgtn.com or search for CGTN in your app store. And follow CGTN Europe on Twitter, on Facebook and Instagram.
Coming up next on CGTN, it's Africa Live. But we'll see you again next week. From all of us here in London, have a great weekend. Goodbye.